Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Before I go ahead and hand off the presentation to our presenters, I just want to cover a bit of housekeeping material with you. We will be recording today's session, so keep an eye on your inbox in the days following the event for a link to the recording. You can use that for review or to share with a colleague who couldn't make it today. Also, if you have any questions for our presenters or comments, please feel free to direct them via the questions or chat window, and we'll do our best to address them as time allows. I know we've got a rather full agenda today, so we will do our best to make sure we get some questions answered at the end of the session. So without much ado, I just want to thank you for joining us today to learn how to supercharge your executive dashboards with Stratusphere UX and Power BI. We're joined today by Thomas and Perpram, who are going to take us through today's presentation. Thomas?
Thank you, Ray, and welcome everyone. Happy afternoon. So before we get started, I wanted to quickly give you a glance of the agenda. Today's presentation is going to be split into 3 parts. After a quick intro about Liquidware and our solution, we'll dive into the key concept behind Stratusphere API, Power BI, and dashboard. Then we'll dive into a walkthrough of the process, how to basically what major step you're going to take to build your dashboard, and we'll finish by an actual demo. So we'll go ahead and start from scratch, all the way from building the queries to publishing a dashboard online. So for those of you who don't know Liquidware, we're a solution provider. We make software. We're created in 2009, and we focused on helping customers manage their workspace at scale. If I have to summarize us in one sentence, that's basically it. We've since for the past 10 years, we focused on any desktop transformation. So we started by helping customers migrate successfully from physical desktop to VDI through VMware and then Citrix. And then lately going to the next frontier and moving the workload to cloud-based workspace like Amazon and WVD from Microsoft and Azure. So we offer 3 main solutions. Profile Unity, our first solution, deliver user environment management. In a nutshell, it allows you to automatically harvest and deliver follow me profile, everything that makes your desktop, regardless of the OS or the delivery platform. So we can manage a single profile for a user, includes his settings, his preference, his data, and deliver that at log on physical, virtual, on premises or in the cloud. Doesn't matter to us, and the profile will follow you. FlexUp, on the other end, works kind of jointly with Profile Unity and allows the delivery of application layering. Application layering, if you're not familiar, allows us to basically redirect the install of an app on a VHD, a file that basically behaves like a disk. That allows us to do some really interesting things like snapping an application on an existing XenApp or AppStream server, or simply on the desktop at will. 0 downtime, at logon, or on click, or at boot. So as you can imagine, it simplifies the image management and the overall delivery and maintenance of application. Finally, Stratusphere is our monitoring tool, and that's what we're going to focus about today. It allows us to monitor any type of workspace. Again, physical, virtual, in the cloud, Windows, Linux, or even Mac. We'll track everything that's going on inside the desktop, but also outside, and we'll be able to tell you how it's being delivered and how well it's running. So we pull metrics tied to usage, obviously, but also performance. So we can tell you with great details how much time it took you to log in. We can tell you the latency, disconnect, and so on and so forth. So we're typically involved at different stage of customers' project. You may have heard of us, or you may actually have even used us during the planning phase as you're trying to see what platform is best suited or simply scale out the resource. Stratusphere will help us during the planning phase in understanding what users have, what do they actually use, so you can determine what do they need. So great tool for the planning phase. Onboarding and migration is where both Stratusphere and Profile Unity comes into play. Profile Unity will be extremely useful for the migration, because for us, there is no migration. Once we gather the profile, we can deliver it at will. So it simplifies greatly the migration phase. And we typically use Stratusphere to validate a design or validate a migration. We can track capacity planning, but we'll also be able to validate by establishing a baseline of user experience before you migrate, and then comparing. And that before and after comparison is the success ratio we all thrive for. Understanding that you just move users from A to B, physical, virtual, cloud, etc., or VMware to Citrix or Citrix to VMware, or Windows 7 to Windows 10, and understanding the impact on the user day-to-day is usually a great insight. And obviously, customers use us in production once they moved to manage the environment. And that's where all three products come into play. FlexApp for the application delivery, Profile Unity to have a single pane of glass that manage the entire user profile, and Stratusphere to keep an eye on how things are going, or if nothing else, trending, SLAs, you name it.
And even if you're in production afterwards, once you finish the migration, it is a continuous process. You need to keep monitoring your environment. That's what we've noticed, because it doesn't matter how well you do in any IT environment. When you're working with different people, anyone sets a flag or flags an option in one product, and it can change the entire landscape. So it's important to keep monitoring.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. All right, let's dive into the main concept. So Stratusphere is the product we're going to focus on again. And Stratusphere is a monitoring solution. It's delivered as a virtual appliance. So you can either download that as a VM on, it will run on any hypervisor of your choice, VMware, Citrix, Hyper-V, Nutanix, Acropolis. And it's pre-built, pre-configured. The setup itself takes minutes. You need to assign an IP address, DNS name, and you're off and running. From the appliance, we'll deploy agents. So we're going to deploy agents on the target desktop or servers that you want to monitor. You can include everything from the endpoint device to the workspace itself. And even we have customers running the agents on critical servers like application server, web server, infrastructure server, to really get that end-to-end monitoring. So in the installation is fairly simple. You can also deploy Stratusphere directly from cloud platform. So today you can actually look and deploy Stratusphere from Azure Marketplace and AWS Marketplace. So really there, built in, ready to go. We track about, I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere between 300 and 500 metrics. So the scope of Stratusphere is really, really deep, or I should say wide. We gather any type of data, any Windows metrics you can think of inside the guest OS, as well as network data, communication, wave and pool data from the hypervisor. So whether it's a plugin to vCenter, Xen Server, Acropolis, so we can tell you what's going on at the hypervisor level. Everything is pulled in, correlated, and stored into a SQL database in Stratusphere. Everything is also timestamped, quite important because it allows us to do some interesting trending, but also in use case where you need to isolate an incident or a resource issue or bottleneck, where time correlation becomes essential because you can pinpoint the incident and really understand the ramification. Did he touch on the hypervisor? So you could, to some extent, you could see the impact of a single application, let's say, running out of memory, all the way back to the storage and the hypervisor, if needs be. So, how's the tool structure? So getting the data was 50% of the challenge when we built a monitoring tool. The other 50% is delivering the data, allowing you to consume the information the best way we can. So as pretty much every traditional monitoring tool, we have a web UI. So you access information from a web client. From there, you can see the data, manipulate it, drill down, make queries, look at different dashboards, or simply look at the information. We also have a library of reports. So there's about 150 standard reports in our library. You can schedule, send by email, and so on and so forth. You could, even if you want to, directly connect to the SQL database and pull information directly from there. And finally, we have alerts on a more proactive note. We have the ability to send alerts through SNMP or email and so on and so forth. But like every other tool, we're always faced with the main challenge for us is getting as close as possible to your needs, knowing that we'll never bridge that gap. There's always going to be a gap, no matter how many reports we create, no matter how many different UI components we propose. There's always going to be a scenario where you like that report and it's got 80% of the data you want. You just wish you had those 2, 3, 4, 5 extra data points, or you just don't like the layout. It's proposed as a list. You wanted something more in terms of a chart or a pie chart. The truth of the matter is that we always trying to play catch up, or we try to anticipate. We try to create reports, trying to put ourselves into your shoes and think, okay, what would they want to do? Matters are it's always something evolving. So always trying to offer as close as possible to your needs, knowing that we'll never succeed 100%.
And it's you see the challenge. It's not only for us as a vendor in building software, but within a company, a corporation, you see that the challenge as well. Presenting data as a technical person to executives is harder, and you want to automate that process basically. Yeah, it's a challenge bringing the right data to the right people always.
So a few years back, we introduced the concept of the API, and the initial thought behind the creation of the RESTful API is to enable the direct access to the information through a URL-based query, direct, without login, without going through the UI. The main goal initially, or the main objective, and behind the addition of the API was integration. So the initial use cases was to integrate Stratusphere data into third-party tools like management platform or service desk tools, as they can use the information we provide. But we also saw an opportunity to leverage the API to do whatever we want with the data. And one of the use case was, hey, great, I can actually build a report using the API. So I really jump into that and Pepperm as well. And the main reason, the main point that attracted me to it was frankly my own laziness. I don't know SQL, and thanks to the API, I don't have to learn SQL language. The API language is super simple, and it took me an hour or two to less than that to learn it. So to get the basics is really easy. I don't need to know the entire database schema of Stratusphere, which is a huge time saver, especially considering that pretty much every 3 or 6 months, we keep adding data into the database schema. We just added, last year we added trace routes, event logs, and I'm probably missing 5 or 10 other big items we've added. So we keep adding data to keep up with the industry and the change in the technology. So trying to remember the database schema was too much for me. So I don't have to learn those things, so which makes it really accessible for everybody. I can pretty much get any information I want from Stratusphere. As long as it's data that's relevant, I can get access to it. And I can get it in either a web HTML format, web JSON, or CSV file. So if I just want to forget about the dashboard, if I just want to extract data, that's also a great tool to do that. Just pull it out, CSV, dump that into Excel, I'm done. I can embed that into a web page or any tool that can work with URL, and we'll give you an example, and that's what we're going to use. Finally, it's actually supported. So if the API doesn't work, it's part of the product, which means that I can build a report using any tools where the API is embedded into it. I can give it to you. Now you're obviously responsible for the maintenance of the layout, the whatever you do with that data. But if the data doesn't return, if the query doesn't return data, you can pick up the phone and call support. It's part of our support. So give you safety and backup for your dashboard. Now, as I mentioned, if you just use all you need to access the API, as any RESTful API, is a web browser. Get a web browser. You can you know the IP address or the DNS of the hub. You can start pulling that out tomorrow. Now, what gets interesting is when you start actually combining that with other tools. When we started playing with the API, I actually used Excel a lot. And the main reason is because it enables me to go further than just pulling the data out. And that's really what we're going to focus on the rest of that presentation is getting the data is one thing, and it's interesting, but it gets really powerful is when you start to bring your own IP, your own reasoning, your own calculation on top of that data to come to the answer. So it's no longer from just pulling the data to support the answer, it's actually to get the answer. So I've done a ton of those with Excel, which is probably not the best tool to do sexy presentation, but it's a great tool for data manipulation. Or you could use business intelligence tool like Power BI to actually go one step further and automate the process further. What gets more interesting is Power BI or Tableau or tools like that are more suited or more integrated to allows you to create live or dynamic dashboard that you can access from a web link, basically. And that's where tools like Excel might be more challenging. So to summarize, basically the main idea behind this dashboard is if I use a tool like Stratusphere API plus a tool like Power BI or Tableau, what I end up getting is the ability to create a dashboard that one is 100% customized to my needs. I'm going to put my logo, my image, the layout that I want. I'm not bound to any structure that you may have in Stratusphere existing reports or dashboards or UI. But if the goal was only to set up like the data you want on your own dashboard, I would say, yeah, it's interesting, but for me, that's not the real value of using Power BI. For us, the real value and really what we want to strive into is not so much a tool to just show data, but it's to bridge that gap between the data that supports your decision and the actual answer. For example, I'll use a stupid example. Let's say you want to use Stratusphere to determine how many applications are being used, or what is the most resource-consuming application. It sounds like a silly request, but let's say you got that, and that's something that's coming every month or every week. Is there information in Stratusphere that supports that? Yeah, absolutely. You can see all the list of application. You can sort them. We actually have a composite calculated field called workload that will tell you what application used the most resource. So you can get that information. But instead, what you could do with the API and Power BI is create a report that just show one number, just the application using the most resource and maybe the detail about the resource. So you're getting from, okay, I can get there to, here you go, here's the answer. It could be any other scenario you can imagine. How many users are connected now, just today? Or how many users using Chrome have actually launched Chrome more than 5 times in the past 6 hours. Pick any scenarios you want. So that's the real value in our mind around those is it's the data plus the intelligence and the calculation to automate that process.
Absolutely, Tom, and bringing what I always say is bringing this kind of data into your daily processes of any worker basically can help them tremendously. Like one different insight or different view on certain things, like even financial. If you've bought software a product a couple of weeks ago. You want to see how many people are using it. You can trend that. Yeah, make a trend line and see the adoption of a product. Very simple.
Awesome. So main use case, what we see out there in the field, the first, I wouldn't say the first one, but one of them definitely is personalization, the ability to present the data in a format that's more in line with your company standout, or call scheme, or whatever. The ability to offer restricted access dashboard is another one. It's something big, but in our mind will probably slow down eventually in the future. The idea here is you want to give access to some of the data to an executive or a management or somebody that's not in IT, but you don't. Most of customers don't want to give access to the entire web client of Stratusphere. There's just too much data. It's a powerful tool with a lot of abilities to drill down in every direction, and that's probably not what you want for, let's say, another BU manager. You want them to get the information they need, not everything. So that's a great use case. I mentioned this is something we'll probably see slow down, simply because Stratusphere dev team has been fairly busy on that end, and coming soon you'll have the ability to not only build your own dashboard inside the web client, but also we're introducing the concept of profiles and roles, user roles inside Stratusphere. So you'll be able to create user credential that only have access to Stratusphere dashboard. So that use case is pretty much going to get be handled directly by Stratusphere by itself. Data mining is another one. That's something that Pepper mentioned earlier, and I think that's very powerful. If you start to using tools like Tableau and Power BI, you're not limited to just Stratusphere data. So it opens a whole door to additional opportunities, like adding information from your HR system, your accounting system, your sales system, your MSRP system, etc., etc. So you can start combining data from different sources to do some advanced data mining, training, and so on. Ultimately, for me, though, it all comes back to business intelligence. The whole idea behind that is, again, not just to show data, but to show intelligence and provide the answers. All right, we'll give you a couple examples of dashboard we built in the past, just to give you some ideas of what you can do. This one is fairly recent. It actually started 2 or 3 weeks ago in response to the current situation we're in. As you can imagine, and I'm guessing most of you are in the same scenario, most companies reacted to the pandemic by sending the worker home. And in some cases, it sparked a need to actually keep an eye and a pulse of your employees. So we are requested and we built that dashboard. This version is used mostly at the executive level. So you won't see, and as you can tell, there's not much technical information or any deep dive. But this report was built to answer 3 primary questions. Are my employees able to connect to the environment? 2, are they actually able to work? Are they capable of functioning? Meaning, do they have access to the application they need? Are they able to operate? And 3, how am I doing from a capacity perspective? I'm at risk of dropping connections, dropping resources because I'm over capacity in my current environment that supports my users. So very high level, giving answers. And there's a second part to the dashboard that you don't see here. That's more about traceability, and this one is more designed for the post analysis, looking back at the entire scenario when this thing is over, and give the ability to look at it from a daily perspective, look back at the past 30, 60 days, and look at what happened and how much time did we react. So you can do some postmortem analysis and determine, is there anything in our current business continuity plan or DR plan that need to be addressed? So both a daily update and a post-activity analysis, or a trace, if you want, a trace of everything that happened. So you can look back and analyze what happened, what was right, what was wrong, what needs to be fixed in order to be ready next time.
We're getting some questions on from the attendees whether these dashboards will be available for download anywhere.
Yes, they will. And if you stay connected until the end of the hours, we'll actually show you the link. Just kidding. We actually have started to put some of them, those examples, on our community websites, which is community.liquidware.com. So we started to upload those together with tech notes that explains how to operate them, and the entire template is uploaded. This is not, and this is a good point, we don't see those as a revenue generating product or solution. So there is no IP attached to those reports. They're free to use. And so you're more than welcome to actually download those and use them in your environment, change them, break them, make them better. If you make them better, we'll love to see them. But yeah, they're going to be free to upload. There is a slight delay between the time we build them and the time we put them on in the community sites. We typically like to have at least one feedback from one customer, just to make sure it works okay before we give it to everybody.
But we will also encourage people to share on community. Sometimes it's not possible and it's very specific to yours, but there are very talented people out there with Power BI that can build amazing stuff. So we hope we get people to share them on the community so everyone can benefit.
Absolutely. And I'll say this. I'm not a Power BI expert by any stretch of the imagination. So some of you that know Power BI will probably have a good laugh looking at my initial dashboard, because I'm probably taking 5 steps where 1 step would do. So I don't know the advanced tricks and tips. Learning as we go, but definitely you can take the core of what we've done and probably make it better. We would actually strongly encourage, and I would love to see Power BI coming from the community being dumped on the website as well, because we can learn from it. All right, there's another example, completely different. This is more related to cloud. The idea here, this was actually requested by a partner, and the main idea was to get an audit of cloud usage. As you can imagine, for one primary purpose, which was, am I paying too much? Is there a way to fine tune or keep an eye on that? And the 2 numbers we really focused on are the runtime of the machine, so how many hours that machine was actually powered on and run during a month, and as well as what's the number of hours it was actually used. And by that we mean, what we track is number of hours when a user was logged in. The tool automatically scaled to a month. So this report, that example, was actually done over 7 days. We tracked 7 days of data and we just extrapolate over months to give you an idea of what would be the consumption over a month. On the left side, we'll also take a look at the sizing, just to make a recommendation on whether your machine are spot on, or are they oversized? Are you never breaching the 20% mark of CPU and memory, or are they undersized? If you're constantly paging or having CPU queue, you probably will benefit from a bigger instance if it's in the cloud. This would apply to regardless of what platform you use, whether it's Amazon, Google, or Azure. That one, I think, was the first one we uploaded to the community site. So the one you're looking at right now is available. And by the way, even though it's designed for the cloud, there's nothing that stops you from running that for any platform. It doesn't matter.
I can even imagine like people getting the costs of Azure or machines running hourly into like a dashboard and do the calculations, and you could even see together with the data from Stratusphere the exact cost locally, so you don't have to log in. It's very cool. And you can compare them to like your on-premises environment. Like, is it actually cheaper to run it in Azure or not? So those kind of comparisons, it's cool to make.
That's a good point, because we actually hesitated in merging that with licensing costs from the different cloud providers. We didn't. simply based on hesitation on whether we want to be involved in those discussions. But nothing stops you from taking that information and pulling the cost factor. I think all platforms have their, I know that all platforms, Google, Azure, and AWS put their pricing online, so they're all available. Power BI is designed to grab information online, so you could actually have something live that combine that data with the cost. So you can imagine having your own version of the cloud usage with actually a dollar or a euro price attached to it. All right, let's dive into the second piece, which is really going through the process. So how would you go from nothing to this? The first thing, let's go over the checklist. What do you need? Well, you need access to a BI tool like Power BI. So that's the first step. You need that to build that. You'll need to make sure that obviously you have Stratusphere and you have access, or you enable access to the API so you can run it. And the last one is more or less, I wouldn't call that a hard requirement, but if you have some basic knowledge of what is a Stratusphere Inspector, that's going to help in the process. But we'll cover that. All right, so access control, it's fairly straightforward. When Stratusphere is installed by default, the API is not enabled by default, and there's really good reason for that, and that's security. API allows you to pull data from Stratusphere without login. So for that, we just shut it down from the get-go. It's not something we want to run the risk of. Now, to enable that, what you want to do, and the easiest way to do that is to set up the IP address of the client. By that, I mean the desktop that you're going to use to run Power BI or Tableau, the one that's going to actually initiate the API query from. So the API is set up to secure the access to the information from the endpoint perspective. So if you don't know what it is, you just open your desktop, trying to run the API. You'll get an error message with the IP address, copy pastes into the administration settings of configuration of Stratusphere, relaunch, you're good to go. There's also a control by login and password that's going to be especially useful for when you build the API on the API using the API builder, and we'll cover that shortly. And so you want to make sure you're using someone like me here that have not only is enabled, but I have API access. So when I log in and launch the API builder, which is another GUI, it'll ask me for my credential, and with my credential, I'll be able to use it. So IP address, make sure you use an administrator account when using the API builder. Which leads me into how do you see the API and how you access it. There's three basic address that you want to keep in the back of your mind. The first one is probably something you'll use once and then never again. It's basically pointing to the IP or the DNS name of Stratusphere, followed by /LWL/API. This is the direct access to the API, I would say a section in the Stratusphere. If it works, and it's too bad I don't have a screenshot for this, but if you launch that and you see a very ugly screen, you're good. And that's most of the time how this page is used. It's a great way to actually test if your IP address has been accepted, if the API is enabled. So you're either going to get an error message, a browser error message, or you're going to get, I think the screen is actually brown, a brown screen with a bunch of things in there, options and tools, and that's the API. So if you see that, you're good, move on. You've just enabled the API in your environment. I'll just say one thing, and the way I've learned the API just to get comfortable with it is you'll see in that very ugly page towards the bottom of the page, there's three options of additional page. One that gives example, one that shows a list of commands you can run in the API, and third one is more structure of the data. If you want to become an expert and you want to know everything about the API, read those three sections. Once you're done reading, you're the expert. You'll know everything there is to know about the API, how the query is made, etc. So if you take, I would say 45 minutes to go through all section, you'll be a master, guaranteed. Now, the reason I say typically customers use it once and done is because of the second one. Same concept, point to the hub / API builder. The API builder will actually is basically us putting a GUI on top of the API. So it allows you to build the API query from a GUI perspective. So very, very useful and time savings when it comes to actually build those queries instead of having to type, remember, oh, what is the name of that field? I don't remember. Our CPU queue is actually CPU_queue. Now, you don't have to know any of those. You don't have to know all the metrics and all the fields column names. You can just use the API builder and it will tell you. And the last one is not something you want to know or use, but this is the structure of the URL of the API query itself. Basically, name, section that actually calls the API. The query itself, what you're going to ask from Stratusphere, is between those two wigglies. So if you're running into a problem, for example, and you want to contact us and says, I don't understand, I'm not getting this or this, that's what we'll probably ask you to send us. And with a bit of knowledge, you can just read through it and know exactly what the API is asking for. Power BI, the reason I keep going back to Power BI, although again, no preference, any BI tool are good. We use Power BI for a very simple reason. It's free. It's widely used. If you have an Office 365 subscription as part of your company, you have access to Power BI, at least the desktop edition, which frankly is all you need to create those dashboards. So if you want to test, you just go to your open Office, Office.365 or Office365.com, log in, go to My Apps or Apps, and you'll see an icon for it. You can download the desktop version, and you're ready. The API builder is, as I mentioned, is going to be central or essentials when you build your queries, simply because as you go through the different options on the top left and build your query, you can see the results of the query on the bottom and see if you're getting the data you want. Then all you're really going to need after that is, if you look on the right side, it actually will build as you go, as you make those decisions, it will actually build on the fly the query. All you have to do after that is just copy paste, and you're done. Now, I mentioned something about knowing about the Stratusphere Inspector, and that's probably, as far as data structure, the only thing you'll want to remember. You don't need to know all the fields, you don't need to know all the bases, etc., etc. What you need to understand is how we structure the data from an access perspective or delivery. There is 500 metrics in Stratusphere, and again, we pull data from different sources. So we'll look at application, we'll look at event logs, we'll look at the hypervisor, we'll look at the network component, and so on and so forth. There's simply too much for us to put into one single view to get the data. So we've built what we call inspectors. Inspectors are clearly, from a database perspective, they're a view. They're a restricted view into the data. And they're organized typically by what we call bases or objects. The main one, and the one you're most likely to use in almost every scenario, is what we call the summary inspector. So if I go back, that's the one named here, summary inspector. That's also maybe the most confusing, because the summary inspector is actually corresponds to the tab here called user, and it's also the one for machine. Same one, same inspector, different basis. So knowing the inspector, so you can use Stratusphere UI and log in and go to the advanced inspector to get a sense of what those views are. Just navigate tab to tab. You'll see after those first two which are the summary, you'll have one for the logins, one for the event logs, one for the application, and so on and so forth. Each of them have a specific focus and a different job to perform. So if you already know Stratusphere and you've played with the advanced inspector, awesome. You already know the concept of the inspector. That's going to save you time as you build those queries. Vice versa, if you don't, but you start playing with the API builder as you build your queries, it's going to give you inside knowledge of how the data is structured and pull from Stratusphere, and that will make your life a lot easier as you use the web UI in Stratusphere and the advanced inspector because you know where it's coming from. Simply put, this UI, this part of the UI in Stratusphere and the advanced inspector are actually using the API to pull the data. Same thing. We just put a GUI in there and control the access.
And in this this inspector view, also if you hover like the column names, you'll see the values, the names that are used in the columns in the API builder as well. So
good point.
It makes it a bit easier.
Yep, there is every columns have two names. You have the actual database name, and then you have what we call the pretty name, which is the the name you see here on the screen. So if you want to know which one, you can basically make that cross using the API builder. All right, next step is the process. So how do you get there? The first step I want you to take if you're building a dashboard from scratch is to start by the end. What I mean by that is it'll save you a lot of time if you take a piece of paper and first try to draw what you're trying to accomplish. This doesn't have to be very detailed, or you may not know exactly if it's going to be a pie chart, a table, etc. But start by the answer you're trying to provide or the goal. From there, you're going to be able to decline and says, okay, if this is what I want to do, I want to see an overview of what's using my resource between the user, a time slice of when my resource are consumed the most, and then on the right, I want to see the application driving most of my resource. Great. I don't know yet how it's going to look, but I have an idea of those three angles. That's my goal. From there, you're going to be able to determine things like, okay, so what are the objects do I need? So am I going with like simple or multiple bases? Do I need like my user by time or just my user or machine, my application, and so on? And as you go down that process in your mind, what I typically do is once I've draw the main goal, I have another piece of paper where I'm starting my shopping list of API queries. Going down that thought process will tell me, okay, if I need by time, by user, and by machine, okay, so first machine and user are different. I'm going to need at least two API queries. Okay, API queries number one, query number two. Second, the one with the time, this is the same inspector, but it's another query. All right, so I'm going to need three queries. Then you go down the one step lower. All right, I've got my three. I know I'm going to need three main queries from Stratusphere. Now, what information I'm looking for? All right, so I'm looking for workload. I'm going to need CPU. I'm going to get memory. I might need disk space. I may need, I don't know, network bandwidth consumption. I may need, what else am I missing? IOPS, that type of things. Right. So now I'm writing down for each one the fields I want. And next step, you go to your API builder. And API query number one, ding, ding, that one's by user, pick CPU, memory, etc., etc.
The nice part is that the summary overview contains a lot of those, the most used values. So you only, in a lot of cases, you may need only one query if you start with building these dashboards.
Yeah, many times I found myself going down that process and then looking back at my piece of paper and realizing that query number 2 and number 4 can actually be accomplished by a single one. I just need to put the metrics next to each other. So usually you have that little bit of consolidation process going on. Now, once you've got the queries you want, and again, use the API builder to validate that the field displayed on the bottom are exactly what you need. All you really need to do is go to that box on the top right corner, not the top, the middle corner, right corner, select the entire URL, copy, paste into Power BI. Once you paste it, Power BI is actually going to convert that into a table. So now it presents the information that Power BI can use to build the dashboard. From this point on, you're done with the API. It's 100% Power BI or Tableau. And again, as an exercise. From there, you've created your fields, you've populated your Power BI template with the fields you need and the tables you need. It's all a question of building the dashboard, creating your graph, positioning, creating the page, and so on and so forth. Once you're satisfied with that, you can actually either just save that as a PDF or PowerPoint, but Power BI allows you to publish that. So this could be published into a single HTML link that you send someone. That's all you need. Once it's finished, and that's really what I like about tools like Power BI is that's all you need. So you can send that to someone. That someone doesn't need to have access to Stratusphere, it doesn't need a login. It doesn't actually need access to Power BI. It doesn't need to have the Power BI desktop downloaded. It doesn't need anything but a web browser. And the dashboard that are populated by those tools are dynamic in the sense that you can actually click on things and select filters and so on and so forth. So live dashboard based on what you just built. Right, so we're now getting to the last part of this presentation, and I'll actually take you through a full scenario. So we're going to start from scratch. I have a template built here that has, this is, by the way, this is Power BI desktop. As you can see, there's nothing. I don't have any fields. I don't have any tables, anything like that. You might see the layout of the Power BI desktop change whether you're on Windows 7 and Windows 10, but they're fairly consistent, so you can navigate. One thing I noticed as I used it in both is Windows 7 will call that option queries, and this one they changed it to transform data. So as long as you remember that based on the version you're using, it should be okay. But it's the same thing. You can see here I've opened a new window called Power Query Editor. Don't be intimidated by that. It's very simple. So I will open that up, and I don't know, for the demo, what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I want to see. I'm just trying. We'll do something very simple and probably silly, but I've got all those users that complains all the time that their desktop is slow. So I just want to be done with that, and I want a report that's going to tell me whether they're okay or they're actually undersized and they need more resource. That's all. That's all I want to know. All right. So as we mentioned, I have an idea. I'm going to go by CPU and memory. I'm not going to take my piece of paper and build a dashboard because frankly, we don't have time. But going with that mindset or that goal in mind, I'm going to switch to the API builder. So the API builder by default opens on Summary Inspector and by user, which is lucky because this is exactly what I need. However, I don't need all those data points. So we're going to change that, and I'm going to click on the columns where I'm going to do my shopping. So we talked about CPU, so we're going to go CPU used, and we talked about memory, which should be in there, memory used. And for the sake of the demo, we'll just stay there. So 2 data points, CPU use, memory use by user. It's based on the last 2 hours. So that's all I really need. I'm going to select that field, right click to copy. By the way, if you ever want to test that, and that's got nothing to do with Power BI, but this is what the API, when you run it, will actually look like. I'm just going to execute that value, and you can see it's telling me the data. And by default, it's going to use JSON format. And this is important because I'm going to show you the 2 ways you can enter that into Power BI. So I've copied that link. Now I'm going to switch here, go back to my query. I've created a number of parameters. This is me just playing with different hubs, so don't mind that. We're just going to do it really simple. New source, web. And we're going to do basic. So I'm just going to paste and go. I basically took my API query, copy and pasted that. And it's going to open, it's going to run the query. And that's where I'm getting what I call the pros and cons of the JSON format. JSON format's really simple, but in Power BI, I need to take a couple extra steps to translate that into a table for Power BI. So I'm going to call that one JSON query, because I'm going to show you the other one after that. So the first thing it's showing me here is actually the query, the JSON header of the query, not the actual data. To get the data, I need to get to that table, click on the list. It shows me that he found 28 records, and that's where I click on convert to table. I don't know if I clicked. Let's click. Here we go. You don't have to worry about delimiters. By default, we're very standout. So Power BI and the API understand each other. I got the columns, and it still only shows me the records. I need to click on that button to expand and click OK. And now I have my data. It's done. It's ready. However, as you can see here, Power BI adds that column 1 to every header. That's a bit annoying because it creates like those super long column names. On top of that, it did not automatically understand that this column is a number. So I might have to do that if I need to do averages or peaks or any type of operation in Power BI. It needs to know what type of data it is. So I would have to say, yeah, that's a decimal number. And that's it. So not too crazy, but still you have those 2-3 steps additional that you need to add. So now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm just going to change the output from my API query. I'm going to ask the Stratusphere API not to give me things in JSON format. So this is our first one. But I'm going to change the API so it delivers the data in the CSV format on HTML. So we're going to go to output. And here in the output format, they have those 3 options. To be honest, I never tried this one. Maybe at some point I'll need to try, but we're going to try this one. It's CSV format, but on HTML. So if I were to copy that and show you what it looks like, this is my same query in JSON format. Paste. Going to repeat the same query in HTML. That's what it looks like. So we have that. Go back to my Power BI, and we're going to do this. We're going to repeat the exact same process. I'm going to go in transform data or query if you're Windows 7. New source, web, paste. Okay. Now don't let that throw you off. The first thing I'm going to get is an error message because it's expecting, Power BI is expecting a JSON format. So you don't click on retry, you don't click on cancel, you click on edit. And now this time it brings you back to the same screen as before, except gives you those options. And this is what you want to change. Change JSON to CSV document. Honestly, between you and I wish Microsoft done that from the get-go, so I don't have to go back and forth. But not a problem. Click on edit, change that to CSV, click OK. And now not only do you get the data, but you actually understand the layout, understand the columns name are right, and even the format of the columns is correct. I'm going to click on OK. So you can see here, he automatically detected this is a number. This is a text. So with that kind of hiccup in the middle where you have to click on edit, I like the CSV format a lot better because it saved me so much time after that. I'm going to call that one CSV query so I can distinguish, close, and apply. And we're done. Apply changes. And you're going to see now that we'll have 2 queries. And they're basically doing the same. You can tell automatically that this one, they use the pretty names instead of the actual name. So if nothing else from a column names, the CSV query is a lot more nicer and useful. Now I've got the data, but again, the goal of Power BI is to add business intelligence. So we're going to add some intelligence into that. I won't go crazy, but we're going to keep with that goal in mind. I want to know who's right to complain and who's just a complainer. So I'm going to add a new column. One quick word on that, and again, this is not designed to be a Power BI class, but a couple of tips I've learned down the way. If you're familiar with Excel, if you build formulas in Excel, you've got a leg up, because Power BI is fairly similar in the approach. So I'm going to add a column that I'm going to call sizing. I'm going to make a couple if statements. So if the CPU used, yes. is greater than, I don't know, 50%, we'll say. Somebody running an average 50% is, yeah, close to maximum, then yes, it's undersize. I'm actually going to copy this because I'm going to reuse that later in my if statement. Right. If not, so if CPU is below 50%, I need to check on memory. So if the memory, yep, that's the one, is above, and we'll do something crazy like 70%. So if in average it's running at 70%, I know that Microsoft threshold is about 75% before you start paging. So since right now I'm not going crazy, I'm just using averages, I'm going to put my average at 70%. Then you're also undersized. If not, if my CPU is below 50 and my memory is below 70, you're not undersized. So in that case, just stop complaining. If I knew how to type right, there we go. And maybe I don't need a capital C. That's just me. Oh, here we go. All right, that's done. That's going to be my intelligence. Now, the main difference, if you're curious, if you're coming from the Excel world, Excel thinks cell by cell. Power BI thinks column by column. So I made one rule, my if statement, it applies it to the entire table. So a lot simpler actually than Excel when you think about it. Right, so I've got the data I want. Now I need to build my dashboard. And let's see, we're gonna start by username. I don't know, maybe I want a table here. I want
We had a
the user.
question, Tom.
Yes, go ahead.
One of the attendees regarding the login. You can do the same exercise with login data. So if you use a login inspector, you can see domain controller, latency, group policy, times, all that sort of stuff. That happened during user login. You can put that in the same dashboard.
Actually, that's an excellent question, and I never thought about it. But we might, no promises, but just based on that, we might give it a shot. I'd love to make a template on login breakdown, something that would just look at a group of users, and maybe I'm wondering what might be interesting is like, okay, show me where's the top slow areas, whether it's the DC discovery, whether it's the profile, whether it's the GPO, and then break it down by section, right? That might be interesting to do. So great idea, and I'll take all the credits. I'm kidding. But yeah, we can definitely do that. All right, I've got my username, and I don't know, I'm gonna add the CPU use, memory, and actual sizing, and now I know who's complaining or not. There we go. Just so I know the information. So now that's just data, right? I want to see a breakdown of my user and the sizing, but this time, no, not that. We're going to remove the sizing. I want to break down by CPU, and I want that into a graph. So maybe we'll have a view that looks, is there a lot of people that use a lot of CPU? And I'm going to do another one with user and memory, so I can compare those side by side. Memory is a lot better distributed than CPU, actually. That's interesting. All right, let's go one step further. And I mean, this is detailed data. It's interesting, but maybe what I want is just the answer. So I want to see a count based on those two things. How many users stop complaining and how many users are in the size? Well, I don't have the count in there. How do I do that in Power BI? And that's where the concept of measure comes in. So I'm going to create a measure, and it took me a while to get it, but once you get it, it's super cool. So I'm going to call that measure user count, and I'm just going to use the count, and I want to count the username in my query. That's it. Count number of users. Period. Enter. Now I created what they call a measure that you see here. Now that measure is a field that is completely sensitive to the context or the filters. So I'm going to add that to that table here. And what you'll see is it automatically understood that what I meant is user count for the user which have a sizing equal stop complaining. So it makes my life a lot easier. And I want to use that as, we'll do something fancy like, there we go, a graph. I know we're on top of the hour, so I'll just mention that when it comes down to the visualization, everything is in there. So I can change the color, I can change the shape, blah, 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 the radius. Where's my colors? Somewhere in there, borders, tooltips, data colors, here we go. So stop complaining will be, I don't know, in red because we don't like them. I don't know, maybe it's green because they should stop complaining, and undersize should be red because it's undersized, and that's it. All right, so I'm done. I've got my my dashboard. I'll be the first one to admit it's completely ugly, but for the purpose of that exercise, I think you get the point. Now I need to deliver it. I'll click on publish. It's going to ask me if I want to save. Sure. We'll save the dashboard. And what Power BI is going to do first is it's going to open that in something called My Workspace. My Workspace is the best way I can. Oh, I've done that before. I can describe it as this is the web-based version of Power BI Desktop. So this is what you'll use internally to share that or publish it. You can use it to share it with maybe another IT person that don't, yes, I do have an account, that don't have Power BI Desktop, but you want him to be able to change filters, makes difference, etc., etc. Still, so yet I'm in my Power BI template, a workspace on the web browser. Now, what I want to do is I can exchange that with my colleagues and they can play with it, they can change it, blah, 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 etc. What I really want to do is share that with my boss. So I can tell him, listen, there's only like 3 users out of 28 that are really undersized. The rest are just complaining for no good reason. So I'm gonna actually publish to web. And I'm going to copy this. Now, what I can do is I'm going to open a new tab, and this is the link I would send someone. Now, this is what my boss would see. It doesn't have Power BI. It doesn't have the desktop. I can close any of those behind. We don't see it. And it can just consume the data. Click on it. It opens. And for example, if you want to see who's undersized, here you go. And you can see what CPU. You can see automatically that their bottleneck is memory. It's not CPU, and so on and so forth. So if you can, it's actually dynamic in the sense that you can actually play with it. Want to know what DB is doing? Is part of the stop complaining group, and is actually the one using the less memory and average CPU. And that's it. I know we're we're over time, so I'll stop. We'll wrap up here, and let's see if we have any remaining questions we need to address.
Thanks, Thomas. I see one question here where someone said, where was the Stratusphere connected in Power BI?
So Stratusphere is not directly connected to Power BI. It's all the API. So we're using the connection. If you want the connection, and I want to make sure I understand the question. Paprime, let me know if I'm digressing, but the connection is really done here.
Yeah, the Power BI is like a pull mechanism. So Power BI pulls the data from our API.
Yes.
All right. With that, I know we're over time, and it looks like we've answered most of the questions because we peppered some of them in during the presentation. I thank you all for joining us today. I saw one question that just popped up, and I know it's come up a few times. And will the recording be sent out? Yes. Keep an eye on your inbox in the days following the event for a link to the recording. Use it for review, share, whatever. We'll also have the links to the community and some other helpful links for you in that email as well. So with that being said, thank you to all of us for joining us today. Thank you, Thomas and Perperum, for bringing us through today's presentation, and have a great day.
Awesome.
Thank you,
and
guys.
I just put up the link to the community sites where you see a couple of templates. So you'll see that in the recording. But again, community.liquidware.com is where you'll see everything. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.